Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, for Louisiana consumers, the good news is that gas prices at the pump are low. The bad is that gas prices at the pump are low. We'll examine tonight the impact that a global plummet in petroleum has locally. We'll also look at a Texas judge's worrisome ruling in the Benson family dispute, and at speculation that a network news anchor might have fabricated stories in his Katrina coverage. Plus, we will look at the Orleans Parish School Board, where there is a new superintendent and new interest in charter schools, and at the long-closed auditorium looking for interest. On stage for us are tonight's Informed Sources: Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Gordon Russell, managing editor for Investigations, the New Orleans Advocate; Kevin McGill, reporter, the Associated Press; and Danielle Dreilinger, education reporter, NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. And we're going to go first over to Gordon and the continuing Benson saga. More news this week. What's the latest developments?
Well, there's been a lot this week. It's sort of confusing to follow all of this, but there's been a court proceeding in Texas over some of the moves that Tom Benson made in his daughter's trust. And the latest development was that to the former mayor of San Antonio, Phil Hardberger, who was people here may remember him as the guy who tried to take the Saints to San Antonio, but he also had a record of being very open to New Orleans evacuees and so forth, welcome them with open arms. Anyway, he has been put in charge of the trust, which is in the name of Renee Benson, Tom Benson's daughter, that Tom Benson had been in charge of. That's kind of the latest development. They're still skirmishing separately over whether Tom Benson had the ability to move some of the assets, including the sports teams, out of some other trusts that are in the name of his grandchildren and his daughter. And then separate from that, there's still the skirmishing over the former heirs, I guess you could call them, the estranged family members, still want to have an examination of Tom Benson to see whether he is mentally unfit to handle these affairs.
You remember, let me ask you about Phil Hardberger, because your memory is a lot kinder than mine. Mm-hmm. I remember him as a guy who was ready to dance on the grave of New Orleans. I mean, he was really anxious to get the Saints. He had press conferences saying, I think we got him, we're going to have him. Right. And if he welcomed New Orleans, I think he welcomed New Orleans because he wanted the Saints franchise. And for the judge to say that this is a friend of New Orleans, I mean, out of all the people in Texas, this is like the #1 predator.
Yeah, no, I don't mean to sound like his biggest cheerleader, but I guess I was referring to, and I have some family in San Antonio, and they, one thing that he did do that maybe he didn't get as much credit for here is that he said, we need to welcome these New Orleanians who are being sent our way, and they were very gracious about, I mean, Houston gets most of the credit here, but San Antonio also did a lot to put up, house evacuees and feed them and so forth. And I think he and the mayor of Houston, if my memory serves, kind of got together and said, we need to, there was a lot of angst over there about, do we really want all these people? And he was very clear that, this is America and we have to take these people. And now, as regards the Saints, I'm not going to argue with you there.
And at least nothing indicates from this court proceeding that he's going to be able to grab the Saints.
Right, exactly.
And that leads to the fact that the trust in question there in Texas was a trust that Shirley Benson, Mr. Benson's first wife, who passed away, set up for her daughter, Renee Benson, right? And the assets in that trust do not involve the Saints or the Pelicans, is that correct?
Right. It's a little bit difficult to keep track of what all is in what trust because there's a whole number of trusts, but my best recollection on this is that the bulk of the team, that 95% of the Pelicans and 60% of the Saints had been in this other group of trusts that are not the one that's now in dispute in Texas. Now, I don't know exactly where the other 40% of the Saints were, but those are the assets that Benson had moved out of those trusts and that was being challenged by the heirs.
And so let's go back to the Texas proceedings right now. There have been two people named, the former mayor and then also another estate attorney, is that correct?
Correct.
To be considered co-receivers. The restraining order still exists as far as Mr. Benson not being able now to move any assets around. So these co-receivers, what exactly then do they do?
That may be above my pay grade, but I assume they're supposed to make sure that the trust is managed responsibly. And my guess would be that in the short term, they're probably not going to do much of anything, but that's just a guess. I mean, I think they're probably not going to start making all kinds of bold financial moves with this money, but that's just because that would seem...
You would also think that a lot would depend on what happens over here in that interdiction proceeding against Mr.
But the fact is, most of us don't care who gets which ranch or something. But the question is, the Saints franchise, where is that in the process? How protected is the Saints franchise now?
I mean, that's a tough question, and I'm not sure I'm the best qualified person to answer it. But I mean, it seems to me like the biggest question in all of this was whether Tom Benson had the ability to move the majority of those teams out of the trust belonging to his heirs and giving them over to his wife. And I think probably with the most recent moves he made, where he gave a portion of he gave a promissory note. This is all very confusing, but he gave a promissory note that pledged a portion of the team's value in exchange for taking those out of the trust. He gave this promissory note that is sort of mortgaged against the team, I guess you could say. So it seems like that is going to guarantee the value of the stuff that he took out of the trust, which it seems like he's going to be able to do this in the long run. It seems like that's if I had to guess, that's where this is all going.
Well, yeah, and a core issue, of course, is the competency of Tom Benson. His heirs are saying that he's just not competent enough to make these business decisions. The Texas judge, from what I've read, has said, I'm not dealing with this. This court is not going to deal with this issue. That's going to be left in Orleans Parish.
Yeah, and from everything that we've written and that the Times-Picayune and everyone else has written, it seems like that's a pretty high bar to get over for a judge to declare. A judge doesn't really want to get in the middle of this and say, this guy's not competent.
There's another town in this, too, and that's New York, where the NFL headquarters are, and we know that Roger Goodell seems to be behind Benson, and that's going to be a powerful force in resolving this.
Well, it does continue. I know that in this Monday, back in court in Texas, from what I understand, to formally establish these two co-receivers, and we'll see where it goes from here. Thanks a lot, Gordon. Oil prices. Oil prices. Now, we're enjoying it, taking a look at those oil prices, under $2 for a gallon of regular gas, but that's really having an impact on our state budget.
Yeah, it was funny because last week there were 3 different days, 3 different news stories in 3 different locations, and each of them kind of shed the light in different ways on how much pain there was, unless you were at the gas pump, because of oil prices going down. I guess the biggest was a week ago Monday. Revenue projections for the state went down again by hundreds of millions more, and it means mid-year budget cuts now, which the governor is working on and which legislators will start taking a look at later this month. And next fiscal year, which begins July 1st, there will be $1.6 billion less to work with than had earlier been projected. The next day, the BP trial, which wound down this week, ended this week, but it's whether BP Exploration and Production Company will be fined as much as $13 billion under the Clean Water Act. One of their arguments, BP Exploration's arguments, is that their parent company may not step in and help them out if there's a big fine. Why? In part because of oil prices less than $50 a barrel. Impact here in Louisiana could be that a lower fine, if the judge decides on one, means less money for our share of those Clean Water Act penalties. Yeah. Then Wednesday, there was an announcement by a South African energy company, Sasol. They've decided to delay a final decision on a $14 billion development in Lake Charles that would have taken natural gas and turned it into diesel fuels and other fuels. They decided this was part of their overall strategy, again, to deal with low oil prices.
And so do the people in the industry, in the oil industry, I mean, are they anticipating that this is going to be for a long ride, or are they still doing some investment in infrastructure and stuff?
It's hard to tell, but there are some signs that people think what goes down must come up in the energy industry sooner or later. On Thursday, there was a maritime industry business that announced they're going ahead with an expansion of an office and training complex in St. Rose. This is a company that provides support for the industry. liquefied natural gas, which is different than the process Sasol was going to do. It's just cooling natural gas to a liquid state. There's still a lot of LNG projects, plants and storage facilities and export projects that are still on the books. And a new one was, a $2 billion one was announced just this week by a Texas startup, again, for that Lake Charles area where a lot of LNG work is really big. So it's not, but the real forecast is hard to come by. You just don't see whether anyone's willing to say this is going to last a few months or a few years. And it's not a supply, it's a supply problem. There's too much oil right now, and a lot of it will depend on what happens in the Middle East.
You listen to the talking heads on television, and you read the experts, and the consensus seems to be that they have no idea. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, and I believe the Advocate did something the other day about trying to get a handle on what's going to happen, and there just doesn't seem to be a strong consensus yet.
Yeah, I mean, the people we talk to seem to think that oil prices will rebound somewhat, but that the days of $110 a barrel oil may be gone for a long time or forever. If I could just add one thing too, as Kevin said, the budget shortfall for next year is $1.6 billion, and the administration is keen to blame this all on oil, but it actually is maybe $400 million or thereabouts is attributable to the low price of oil, and the rest is actually sort of a structural problem that we have.
Once upon a time, in the 80s when we went through something like this, oil, severance and royalties was something like 40% of the budget or more.
42%.
Yeah, I think it's about 13% now.
Right.
So it's not all oil, and it's something that we talked about here a few weeks ago. The tax breaks, some of which may or may not be helping draw new business to the state. It's something that the legislature is going to have to take a hard look at.
And will they? Do you think they're going to be moving on some of these tax incentives?
I mean, I think they're going to talk about them. I don't know if they're going to move on them. And when you have, the governor has made it pretty clear that any reduction of a tax credit he considers a tax increase, and he won't abide by any tax increase. So in order to take away a tax credit, you have to give a tax break somewhere else, which means regardless of how you feel about any of this, he's saying we're going to live with the revenue we have. Now, the legislature could buck him, and I think a lot of legislators are pretty fed up with things, but if he's going to veto that, it's going to take a lot of legislators.
And the factor is, this is an election year.
That makes it's hard to, you don't want to vote for, an incumbent doesn't want to vote for a tax increase or anything purported to be a tax increase in an election year, and they don't want to make a cut that's going to hurt somebody in an election year.
Well, in higher education for next year, for the next year's budget, is still going to be threatened with some very serious cuts.
I think no matter what, yeah, and it had already been cut by more than 50% under this administration, state support for higher ed, that is, and so it seems like we could be seeing another cut of close to 50% even.
Although it seems to have escaped the mid-year cut, with and covering the mid-year deficit of what, $103 million.
$103 million right now, and then it went down by another $103 million, another $200 million for next year, which brought that deficit down to about $1.6 billion.
Okay, some serious decisions to be made as we move into this legislative session. All right, thanks a lot, Kevin. Finally, a decision was made in Orleans Parish for a school superintendent after, what, 2.5 years of searching?
More than 2.5 years.
So who is he?
So, first of all, he hasn't started yet. He hasn't signed a contract yet. I'm holding my breath until this is all done. So this is Henderson Lewis Jr. He's 40 years old. He is a St. Bernard native. He's a member of the St. Bernard School Board. In fact, intends to continue serving on that board. He's currently the superintendent in East Feliciana Parish, in about 45 minutes outside of Baton Rouge. He also, he taught and was an administrator in the St. Bernard schools up through about 2000, right as the storm hit, and then he was in New Orleans charter schools for a few years as well. So he seems to have very successfully covered all the bases on a board that is really obviously divided, not only personally, but you have the part that is completely into charter schools, and you have the side that's much more traditional. He's a young black man. People are happy about that as like a role model for the kids in the system. So yeah, people seem to be, in the end the vote was unanimous. And there was, I mean, applause broke out in the room when they made the vote.
Well, he seems to have done pretty well in East Feliciana. He's been there for what, 3 years?
He's been there for 3 years, and it was one of the worst districts in the state, and he has improved a couple letter grades on the state's report card. He got them from being in deficit to having the right fund balances that the state wants. And people, I went up to East Feliciana to walk around and talk to school staff there. So he still lives in St. Bernard. And this is not a commute anybody would ever want. So he doesn't go back and forth every night, but he goes back and forth several times a week. And people there really loved him. They were really enthusiastic. They said that he was, knew what he wanted, and he was, tough but caring, and he let principals really do what they want with a lot of coaching, which I think is a successful model for New Orleans, where there's so many charter schools. It's a different kind of job. It's not like a normal superintendent that runs all these schools and chooses curriculum. It's much more of an oversight, and no one even really knows what a superintendent should be, I think, in this system.
And
or knows the Orleans Parish School Board is anymore. I mean, it used to be, school board was a major force in the community, and the superintendent was a major player, and the selection of a new superintendent was a major news story. And in fact, this probably is, but it doesn't get the kind of emphasis that it used to be, because I don't think anybody, I think there's a diminished perception of the school board now. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, they have much diminished power. After Katrina, most of the schools were taken out of their hands, and they stay there. It's been status quo for several years. Most of the schools in the city, public schools, are overseen by the Recovery School District, which is a state entity.
And all of those schools are charter schools.
All those schools are charter schools.
And I want to move you into talking about charters, too, while we have a little bit more time in this segment, because that's something that the new superintendent will have to be dealing with. But there have been several expressions of interest by groups to establish new charter schools.
Right. So every year, both the state and the parish open up for applications for groups that want to start new charter schools. So this last week, the initial letters of interest were due to the Orleans Parish School Board, and there were 11 groups looking to open 12 schools, which, I mean, not that all are likely to be approved, but OPSB has 20 schools, so that's a lot. And I would say the most newsworthy, well, there are a couple of them, but most newsworthy is that one of the few remaining traditional, conventional public schools in the city, McDonough 35, a group of alumni have applied to charter that school because scores have really gone down since it stopped being a magnet school, and alumni are really unhappy.
And that's under Orleans Parish School Board, isn't it?
And some fairly prominent lawmakers went to MAC 35. That's part of it. I don't know that they're involved in this project, but they've been unhappy.
So this is just the beginning of the process.
Just the beginning of the process.
Okay. And our new superintendent at Orleans, as you said, he's not quite there yet. If all goes well, he will be, I think, by March. He's worked closely with Doris Fortier over at St. Bernard. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was really interesting. He considers her a mentor, and I wondered how their relationship worked because he's on the school board that employs her, but he's also a colleague as a superintendent. And when I called Doris, she was like, "Oh, well, we go way, 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 way back."
And she's certainly very, very respected and has done great stuff over there in the St. Bernard system. She was right there after Katrina. Thanks a lot, Danielle. We're going to talk about, speaking about Katrina, also network anchor who's under fire right now for some reporting that he did regarding Iraq, but now he's being scrutinized for what he said about Katrina.
Yeah, this is, may end up being, a bit of a tempest in a teapot, but Brian Williams has admitted a lie about this story involving his helicopter being shot at by an RPG in Iraq, and that's caused a lot of people to sort of look at other claims he's made. And he made some claims, or he said some things during Katrina that were sort of, you could certainly call them eyebrow-raising, the biggest ones being that he saw a body or bodies float by the window of his French Quarter hotel. He was staying at the Ritz-Carlton, and also he talked about getting dysentery from drinking the seawater. So, we've looked into this a little bit. A lot of the conventional wisdom here is that the French Quarter didn't flood at all. And in fact, it did get a little bit of water. And there are pictures showing, a couple of feet of water in the street outside the Ritz-Carlton. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility that he saw something like that from his hotel. I don't recall accounts of a body in that specific area, but there are certainly bodies not far from there. And there were many bodies in the water.
And the Ritz-Carlton fronts Canal Street.
Canal
There was
Street,
certainly
right.
water in Canal Street, right?
Yeah, there's deep water further down Canal Street. I mean, mostly the corridor stayed dry, but I mean, there was a little bit of water towards the Rampart side of the corridor. It's actually it's harder to establish exactly how deep the water was in every part of the city than I realized. But anyhow, so that's a claim that's come under some questioning. It's possible he saw a body nearby also and sort of conflated this with that. And as far as the dysentery, you didn't hear much about anyone getting dysentery, but maybe he's exaggerating a little bit, or maybe this is a case of he had some intestinal distress and he called it dysentery. I don't know. There were some doctors treating people at the Ritz-Carlton after the storm, and there was some reports by guests of people having dysentery. So it's certainly possible. I don't think this is going to be a story like the Iraq story, but I suppose once a journalist admits making something up, then all bets are off as far as, they got to expect that lots of other things they've said are going to come under this kind of scrutiny.
Well, one person you talked to in your story was Dr. Brobson Lutz, who in effect was deputized as coroner during that time, and he admits to liking Brian Williams, but you asked him about the dysentery, and he didn't see any examples of that during that time, did he?
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, it's hard to find who's the person who's qualified to talk about this. I mean, he's certainly a doctor, and he's a former health director for the city, and he lives in that area, and he was here for the storm. I mean, I don't recall any official reports of any dysentery. But, again, I'm not sure. It's maybe one of these unprovable claims that may be slightly implausible, but...
Well, we know just removing Brian Williams from the discussion, because back at that time, I think when you were at the Picayune, you did a story, a few months after, about reports that proved to be untrue.
Right. Right. I mean, that was a big problem. And, the biggest problem with those stories, there was a lot of really sensational stories coming out of New Orleans all over the world. And the biggest problem was really that it wasn't so much irresponsible journalism as irresponsible public officials, I think. I mean, you had the mayor and the police chief in particular telling these stories that turned out to be tall tales. And they weren't making them up. I think people were bringing these stories to them, and they were repeating them. And I collected a whole bunch of these that I would go to the Superdome each day and talk to people. And I mean, I had notebooks full of people telling me about rapes they witnessed, throat slashings, or that somebody else had witnessed. And it was very hard to sort of sort out the wheat from the chaff in that. But that certainly, there were not a bunch of bodies with slashed throats, or if they were, I don't know where they went, but nobody ever found them.
Well, also, I think you wrote about Brobson Lutz quoting that his dog did drink some of those Katrina floodwaters and didn't get dysentery. Well, I've seen dogs consume a lot of things that we definitely wouldn't want to.
I'm not sure that stands up to
the litmus test,
CDC standards there, but
right. Okay, thanks a lot, Gordon. The Municipal Auditorium, it was the scene of so many wonderful events in this city, but it's been shut down since Katrina.
1 month a year people pay attention to it, that being the month of February because of Mardi Gras, and in memories of the days when you had all those carnival balls there. It was really built back in 1930 as a multiple-use facility, but sort of the unspoken truth was that they also had carnival balls in mind, and they essentially built 2 theaters in there so you could have a larger ball and a smaller ball. And visually, it was a wonderful place. And to this day, there's no better ballroom in the classic sense than the 2 ballrooms that are in the auditorium. Since Katrina, it hadn't come back. And even before Katrina, it was shut down a couple of years when it was used as a temporary gambling casino when they were building the Harris Casino. So that was the first of people having to get used to being somewhere else. And the one good thing that Harris did is that they rebuilt all the bathrooms there. And so it came back as a better place after Harris. And so people were getting used to this new, better place and the auditorium. And then Katrina came in. And nothing has really happened. There is a FEMA grant, something like $28 million, and there is a project being planned to redo the roof and to gut some of the infrastructure. And I think what's coming up is a shell with a nice roof and a gutted structure. But I was surprised. I was talking to some carnival captains, and I always thought that, the crews would just rush back there, at least the ones that were there before. And that's not necessarily the case now. That they've gotten used to a different life. They've gotten used to being in the hotels where there are ballrooms and bar rooms and more places to park. No hotel has a ballroom that is as good as the auditorium was. But, you know, things balance out over time, and you have a whole generation of people now almost, or, you know, who've been away from that building. So I think something it's going to have to happen, that there's going to need to be a coming together at some point of one, going to need to talk to the carnival people. But even if every carnival person said, we want to come back, that's not going to pay the help. That's not going to help pay the rent. So there needs to be a plan. And Bill Capo had done a story on this during the week for Channel 4, and he interviewed Cedric Grant. And Cedric Grant would like to see this, you know, get a private developer and have a developer come and plan and consider anything, you know, any possibility. But something has to be done. But I think it's becoming more evident that it's not going to be as a ballroom, or if it is, it'll be a ballroom that's different than it was before, maybe with more amenities built into it.
And certainly one of the big events was the meeting of the courts, Carnival Night, and you know the crews have certainly figured out a way to get that done.
Yeah, yeah. But back there it was really convenient. They could just walk down the hall.
Well, now they walk across Canal Street,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Which, of course, you guys are witness to every year, because once again, the meeting of the courts coming up, Mardi Gras night, you can see Peggy and Errol and Dr. Hales there.
Sure.
So certainly, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, and so the crews invented a new way. But renovation is going on in the auditorium right now, right?
Yeah, it's
there
going to
is
be beginning.
work.
Yeah, yeah.
We just need to find out what we're going to do with it.
It's more
come
gutting
up with
and
a plan
putting
how to use it.
and putting on the roof, but it just needs to be a lot of. And remember during Ray Nagin, I mean, we look back at Ray Nagin and thinking everything was crazy, but he had decided to have this multi-purpose museum and production thing and all that. Who knows? That might, you know, that might be the way to go.
Okay. We now to look ahead. Errol.
Speaking of Carnival, with the parades this year, there's going to be more of an emphasis on the military this year, especially in the Rex Parade, because of the Battle of New Orleans. We have a lot of military bands and a lot of military presence in Carnival this year.
That's always great to see. Gordon.
Well, and continuing with Carnival, I'm not going out on much of a limb here, but I think it's going to be a huge mess at the beginning of these parades with everything going on Napoleon, and you've got people who go to the same spot every year, so maybe want to stake out a different spot this year.
Carnival goers always rise to the occasion, though. They are going to figure it out.
One of the last figures in the Ray Nagin trial, one of the last people who testified against him to put him in jail in prison for 10 years, Frank Fridella, will learn his sentence. I believe that's going to be next Wednesday in federal court.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Danielle.
And tomorrow, the annual New Orleans Schools Expo is at the Superdome. There's free parking, there's free childcare, and it's just a way for parents to learn about a ton of schools and a ton of resources all at once.
Can they sign up there?
Yes, they can.
Okay.
There's going to be people to help them fill out the one app.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks, you guys, for being here, and thank you so much for joining us. We want to see you again next week from Informed Sources. Have a good evening.